Greetings, hello, this is Kinesiology 214. This is Coach Fleischer. We're in Module 2, Session 4, also known as week number 7 in class. And with this next series of videos, we're going to talk a little bit about how to calculate performance and be able to evaluate the performance of a participant. And there are many different ways to evaluate performance. There are many different metrics you can use. You can look at different modalities in terms of balance, coordination. You can look at more like strength training, how much weight a person is pushing, how many reps they do it. For the sake of this presentation, we're talking more about the cardiovascular system and how the body responds to a training stimulus that's placed upon it. And with cardiovascular fitness, it's part of this process of adaptation. We know muscles get stronger, we know connective tissue gets stronger, same with bones. And the central nervous system has a better coordinated firing response. And really, that's the front end of a workout program, right? You're not packing on a ton of muscle during the first week or two. It's actually your body is just getting better at firing in a more coordinated manner and recruiting the right muscles. Then the muscles and the connective tissue and the bones get stronger as you place a progressive load on them. And then you start packing on more and more muscle. The cardiorespiratory system itself, when you place a load on it, think back to general adaptation syndrome. You have somebody who can't even walk up the stairs with a load of laundry and they're getting winded, and you bring them into the gym. To have them do like a high intensity training protocol right out of the box is counterintuitive. You have to be able to systematically apply that stressor to that person, the human organism, without blowing them completely out of the water. So realize, while all of this good stuff adapts, so does the central nervous system, and so does the cardiorespiratory system. And you have to be aware of these when you start talking training. And when you look at exercise, I'm oftentimes asked about this, like with clients, they'll talk to me a little bit about this whole process and why they're getting so winded, et cetera, and how this whole thing works. And the way I always describe it is, you have this red line and blue line in your body, right? Think of it like the red line and the blue line here in Chicago, although it's the red line going out, the blue line coming back in. And so when a person sucks in a bunch of air, it hits the alveoli, which transfers the oxygen to the blood. That gets carried into the heart pumps it out, and it gets pumped out through an artery. Just remember, arteries away, and you can't go wrong in grad school. That hits the muscles, the oxygen offloads, CO2 and waste product onloads, and it becomes the blue line. Now, the blood itself is not actually blue, but just think of it in terms of blue. And then it hits the veins, right? So arteries take blood away, veins take blood to the heart. So you have this deoxygenated fingers and blood, because you still have a partial pressure of oxygen in that blood, but it's much, much lower than over here. Hits the heart, gets pumped up to the lungs, hits the lungs, the CO2 gets offloaded, and you blow off the CO2, and then you inhale, and that oxygen gets loaded back up into the blood, and it gets recirculated again and again and again. And oftentimes what's missed here is, yes, it's great to suck in a bunch of air, but also part of this process is when you're working out, you have to be able to effectively blow off the CO2. And when I'm working with clients, I'm always talking about in with the good, out with the bad. Make sure you are very aware of blowing off enough CO2 to be able to fully oxygenate your blood for the next bout of exercise. Not easy when you have a newbie who's coming into the gym, but that is part of the process. They have that proper breathing and inhaling and exhaling in a manner where they can oxygenate and then really blow off the waste products at the end of the road, at the end of the blue line, to start the red line all over. So when you look at like a person who is fitter, this whole integrated system actually becomes way more efficient. And they have really, at the end of it is the pump in the system, that's the heart. So out of all this, the whole vascular system and how everything offloads and onloads oxygen to CO2, this right here, the pump of the body, is the heart. And when people work out and they do cardiovascular training, the training adaptation you see, of course, it's in the vascular system, there's greater elasticity you see in the arterial and the venous system, but you also see greater ability to offload CO2, greater ability to unload O2, and same thing happens down here, but the pump itself becomes way more efficient. And if you just think of this in terms of the demand is, I need X amount of liters of oxygenated blood delivered to my muscles in a minute. If your heart is more efficient and can squish out more blood with every single pump, and be more efficient, it's going to take less beats to meet that requirement. And so folks just get more efficient when they're working out. And it is just simple math when it comes down to it. If you require X amount of beats per minute to service this whole system, the fitter you are and the more in shape the heart is, it's able to pump greater amounts of blood with every stroke. Now the trade-off is this. That translates to a resting state where they no longer have to have 70 beats per minute to pump blood to sustain all the systems in their body. Because their heart has become so efficient, their resting heart rate actually adapts lower. Because with each squish and wringing out of the cardiac muscle, it wrings out more blood with each beat. So it takes less beats to fulfill the entire system. So the question becomes this, all right? If you have a person with a resting heart rate of 50 beats per minute, would you consider that person ready to participate in a cardiovascular exercise program, knowing that this person, compared to his peers or her peers, the average for males and females, age bucket dependent, 70 to 75 beats per minute, you know this person's heart is pretty darn efficient. Now, conversely, if you have somebody walked in and their resting heart rate is 100 beats per minute, you have a totally different conversation with them. But in this case, this situation, you know this individual is good to go. With heart rate calculations, there's a couple different ones, but there's a few in the industry that are tried and true and that most everybody will use to some degree. And so, for example, the easiest, the quick and dirty method, like when you're standing next to somebody on a treadmill and you need to do some quick math in your head, you go 220 minus the age gives you a predicted maximal heart rate, and you multiply that by the workload you want them to work at. Okay, Mrs. Johnson, 220 minus your age, 40, that's 180 beats per minute. At an 80% workload, it'll be 144 beats per minute. So getting back to our anaerobic threshold conversation, at 80% or higher, you know Mrs. Johnson needs to work at 144 beats per minute or better. Conversely, you can do the math backwards, right? I mean, math is nothing more than just like mental gymnastics. You're doing flip-flops forward or flip-flops backwards, whether it's addition or subtraction or division or multiplication. And to that end, you can have somebody maybe on a treadmill running, they're wearing a heart rate monitor, and you see that they're at 150 beats per minute. You can do the math backwards to get what percentage they're working at, presuming you know their age. So when you stand next to somebody on the fitness floor and you're working with them and you need like real quick data points just to make sure they're doing all right, I jokingly called it the oxygen allocation test in one of the other previous presentations, or the ability to either hold a conversation or have oxygen to work. This threshold's kind of the magic threshold. Fitter people can work, at this or higher, but fitter people also have another part of the equation where their resting heart rate is so low it skews the actual numbers you see here. So I urge you, when you work with people, first get this quick and dirty down to understand it, but then jump into another example we'll talk about here in a second. Because if you think about the sprinter and the spud, if you remember that, right? The sprinter is burning a ton of glycogen, a little bit of fat. Meanwhile, the guy who's on the couch spud, is burning a ton of fat by percentage, but little glycogen, but the caloric burn is so low, that happy medium that we're always searching for falls in between 3 and 4. And you'll see this type of format, taxonomy if you want to call it, this matrix if you want to call it, but this layout with most heart rate monitor manufacturers. These people who make biometric monitors usually kind of fall into the same trappings of red is the most intense, yellow is the next, green's kind of the medium, blue, then gray. You can notice the corresponding percents here for each. And the beats per minute would actually change depending upon an age. A 20-year-old will have a different beat per minute than somebody who is maybe 60 years old. But what holds true is maximize performance, that 80% and above is really where you're working. And so when you do your workouts and you plan things for your clients, you can now look at it in terms of, okay, I want that lower intensity to burn fat. And eventually this actually becomes not really of any value to your clients. You have to operate in the green zone and the red zone most of the time, what they show over here. I tend to, when I look at my clients, when they walk in, they usually walk in and they're not like in a resting state. They've come in, they've walked in from the car, they've changed, they've had to walk down, they usually have done some kind of warm up, and they'll already be in this state, in the green. And so I'll take them into yellow, red, back to green, etc. And that's another type of training protocol, right? You can have people where you take them into the red zone and you give them a minute to recover, and you see where they come back to in a minute. And if a person can go from 90% down to the 60% load, or in this example, 90% in the red and back down into the blue within a minute, you know they're pretty darn fit. If you have somebody where you've taken them and you take them into the red zone, and after a minute they can barely get back into the gold here, it will be yellow on other formats, you know that they have some work to do in terms of their recovery. So recovery is part of fitness, and you're seeing recovery becoming a little bit more pushed to the forefront in terms of ways to measure fitness, whether it's heart rate variability or heart rate recovery, one or the other. You see this coming into play. So what you have is when you have somebody who's fitter, though, it skews this a little bit. Let me go back to Carvonin. It skews this a little bit in terms of you have to bring into account the resting heart rate, right? Because somebody who is fitter, you put them on a treadmill and you have them running at 5 miles an hour, which is more of a jog than anything else, but running at 5 miles an hour, a person who just walks into the club running at 5 miles an hour will hit red, will hit that 90% within a couple minutes. A person who is fitter and has a low resting heart rate will end up taking more time, or more importantly, a higher workload to get to that red or 90%. So you have to look at and seek out different ways to evaluate performance as your people become fitter. Just keep in mind, though, some of the keys that I look at are a talking test if I don't have any kind of biometrics. If I have a biometric, I'll have them report to me what color zone they're in. I will do some workout training protocols where I will take them into the red and I'll give them a minute to recover as quickly as possible. I have other protocols where I take them into the red and I give them as much time as needed to get back to the blue, and then we go right back to red. I let them recover at their own pace. And then there's other times where I'll actually craft a workout where I'm operating within the different zones for certain amounts of time. It's not carved in stone. I'll tell you that right now. So you can do different formats and different protocols to mix things up, but these are usually my key takeaways and things I look at with training for heart rate. I hope that clarifies a few things and ways to evaluate performance, and be on the lookout for the next presentation, which will be how to evaluate strength performance. Signing off.